1 year. That's all it took for the Texans to rebuild. Houston won just 11 games over 3 seasons from 2020 to 2022. They had 3 different head coaches during the span and had to trade away the guy they once thought was their franchise quarterback. Things were bad. Then in 2023, they won 11 games, including one in the playoffs. 1 year after being a laughingstock, Houston won their division and now have one of the brightest futures in the league. How? Well, the Texans hit at the draft, not just on a quarterback, but on a pass rusher and a wide receiver. Houston became unrecognizable in a calendar year, and a lot of that was thanks to head coach DeMeco Ryans, who is more than just a coach to Texans fans. But first, thank you to DraftKings for sponsoring today's video. Super Bowl 58 is coming up, and we've teamed up with DraftKings, an official partner of the NFL, who have a huge offer for the big game. Right now, all new customers will get $200 in bonus bets when they bet $5 on any wager. You can get in on the action by downloading the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use our code JDPROD. If you're wondering what you can use your $200 in bonus bets on, you can combine multiple bets together from the same game for a shot at an even bigger payout. If sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. You can still get in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy. But again, download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use our promo code JDPROD and bet $5 on any wager and get $200 in bonus bets instantly. That's promo code JDPROD only at DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours. Thank you again to DraftKings, and let's get right back to the video. DeMeco Ryans is from Bessemer, Alabama, and was once a 3-star inside linebacker recruit in the 2002 class. He committed to play at Alabama under Mike Shula. As a senior, DeMeco was a unanimous All-American and won SEC Defensive Player of the Year. Then he was taken 33rd overall in the second round of the 2006 NFL Draft by none other than the Texans. DeMeco won Defensive Rookie of the Year after he had 156 tackles and 3.5 sacks. The following season, he was a first-team All-Pro and made the Pro Bowl, something he'd do again in 2009 after his 4th straight 100-tackle season. In the 2010 offseason, DeMeco signed a 6-year, $48 million extension. However, his time in Houston was almost up. He was traded to the Eagles in 2012 for a 4th-round pick and a swap of thirds, one of which was used on Nick Foles. DeMeco had back-to-back 100-tackle seasons before he tore his Achilles in 2014. Now, he did play in 14 games in 2015, but then was released in the offseason. That was the last time we'd see DeMeco Ryans play, but his time in the NFL wasn't over. He was hired by the 49ers as a defensive quality control coach in 2017. Kyle Shanahan had just taken the head coach job. He and DeMeco actually spent 4 years together in Houston. After 1 season, DeMeco was promoted to inside linebackers coach. Then in 2021, after Robert Saleh left to become the Jets head coach, DeMeco was promoted to defensive coordinator. The Niners defense was great under him, and it got him a head coach interview with the Vikings after his first season as the DC, but he declined a second interview and decided to stay in San Francisco. A year later, DeMeco won Assistant Coach of the Year and decided to take the Texans head coach job, becoming their 4th different head coach in 4 years. Bill O'Brien was the head coach of the Texans for 7 years. They won 2 playoff games under him, but never got past the divisional round despite having a 24-0 lead at one point. No lead is safe against Patrick Mahomes. It really looked like the Texans had found their franchise quarterback. They had back-to-back double-digit win seasons, and Deshaun Watson looked like a star. That didn't last long. Houston only won 4 games in 2020, and O'Brien was fired. David Culley was hired hired to be the Texans' next head coach, and Houston went 4-13 with third-round rookie Davis Mills starting because Watson didn't play after sexual assault allegations. The Texans fired Culley after the season and promoted defensive coordinator Lovie Smith to head coach. He was the Bears' head coach for 9 seasons and took them to a Super Bowl where they lost to the Peyton Manning-led Colts. Lovie was the Buccaneers' head coach for 2 years and was the head coach at Illinois for 5 years. He had plenty of experience, but nobody was saving that Houston team with Davis Mills at quarterback, and the Texans finished 3-13-1. One of those wins came in Week 18. On 4th and 12, with 1:26 remaining, Davis Mills found Brandon Cooks for 30 yards. Not only did that lead to a Jordan Akins touchdown, but then Houston went for 2 with less than a minute remaining, and again, Mills found Akins to go up 32-31. Houston won, and it cost them the first overall pick. Instead, it was the Bears who held all the cards and eventually traded the selection to the Panthers. Bryce Young was widely considered the top quarterback in the class, so the Texans had to settle for C.J. Stroud at 2. C.J. Stroud was a 2-year starter at Ohio State. He backed up Justin Fields as a true freshman, and then he became the guy. Stroud had to beat out Kyle McCord and Quinn Ewers for the starting job. Clearly, Ryan Day made the right call picking Stroud. He threw for 4,435 yards, 44 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. Ohio State went 10-2, but missed out on their chance to play in the Big Ten Championship after they lost to Michigan for the first time since 2011. They did lose to Michigan again the following season, but Ohio State still made the college football playoff where they lost to Georgia in the semifinal. Stroud had another great season with 3,688 yards, 41 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. In his 2 years as a starter, he finished 4th and 3rd in Heisman voting. There were questions of whether or not he was the best quarterback in the draft class, or if he should even be the 2nd overall pick. There were also rumors that the Texans liked Will Anderson a lot. It turns out that was true. Houston traded up from 3-12 with the Cardinals to take Anderson too. He started as a freshman at Alabama and had 7 sacks and 10.5 tackles for loss. He was named 2nd team All-SEC, and Alabama won the national championship. Anderson was really good, and then he became one of the best. In 2021, he had 17.5 sacks and 31 tackles for loss, and in 2022, he had 10 sacks and 17 tackles for loss. He was both the SEC Defensive Player of the Year and a unanimous All-American in back-to-back seasons. Anderson was special, and the Texans knew it. Of course, it's always easier to hit on the consensus top players in the draft, but Houston also found a gem early in the 3rd round with the 69th pick, Tank Dell. He started his college career at Alabama A&M and then transferred to Independence Community College, which you may know from Last Chance U. Then in 2020, Tank transferred to Houston. He only had 428 yards and 3 touchdowns his first season, but then he became the #1 option for future 5th-round pick Clayton Tune. Tank had 1,329 yards and 12 touchdowns in 2021 and followed it up with 1,398 yards and 17 touchdowns the next season. He was first-team All-AAC both years. The Texans absolutely crushed it at the draft, and that rookie class was a huge reason why Houston was good. The Texans didn't have an easy task in Week 1. They had to go on the road and play the Ravens, who finished the season at a league-best 13-4. Baltimore really had their way, even with Lamar Jackson not having his best game. C.J. Stroud showed some promise in his debut. He didn't have a touchdown or an interception, was sacked 5 times, and lost a fumble. Houston lost 25-9 and followed it up with another loss in Week 2 against the Colts. Indianapolis had just drafted Anthony Richardson 2 spots after Stroud. Richardson rushed for 2 touchdowns in the first quarter before he suffered a concussion. His second touchdown came after another Stroud fumble. Houston's offensive line was literally all backups. They had 4 starters get hurt in camp, and Larry Laramie Tunsil missed the game too because of a knee injury. Stroud got sacked 6 times, but finished with a solid day passing for 384 yards and 2 touchdowns. The first touchdown of his career went to Nico Collins late in the first quarter. Nico actually had a career high 146 yards. He went on to break that career high 3 more times during the season. An 0-2 start isn't great, but Houston didn't lose back-to-back games for the rest of the season. The Texans went into Jacksonville and got a huge 37-17 win in week 3, and it was the rookies that led the way. Stroud had another good performance with 280 yards and 2 touchdowns. Meanwhile, Tank Dell had a franchise rookie record 145 yards, including a 68-yard touchdown. And Will Anderson became the first Texans rookie to block a field goal since J.J. Watt. Houston started showing flashes of what they could become, and then they just kept getting better each week. Houston beat the Steelers 30-6 in week 4, while Stroud set a rookie record with 151 pass attempts without throwing an interception. The Texans did lose the following week 21-19 after Younghoe Koo hit a game-winning field goal for the Falcons. Houston had to settle for 4 field goals before finally scoring on a late Dalton Schultz catch. The Texans got right back to 500 by beating the Saints 20-13. That game, finally, CJ Stroud threw his first interception to Zach Bond. 3-3 often isn't anything special, but the Texans had already matched their win total from 2022 going into their bye. Theoretically, Houston had an easy matchup in week 8 against a winless Panthers team. It wasn't just another game though. It was the first overall pick, Bryce Young, playing the second and third overall picks, CJ Stroud and Will Anderson. Carolina somehow won 15-13 to get their first win of the season after Eddie Pinheiro hit a field goal as time expired. That left Houston with a disappointing loss and a 3-4 record with 10 games to play. Regardless, it was likely going to be an improvement from the season before, but then the Texans got hot and so did CJ Stroud. In week 9, CJ Stroud passed for a rookie record 470 yards and had 5 touchdowns in an insane 39-37 win over the Buccaneers. Baker Mayfield found Cade Otton with 46 seconds remaining to take the lead, but they left Stroud too much time. Houston drove down the field, and with 6 seconds left, Stroud found Tank Dell for a touchdown. Dell was one of 3 players with over 100 yards receiving alongside Noah Brown, who had a game-high 153, and Dalton Schultz. That was the first of 3 straight wins for the Texans. In week 10, Stroud did it again, leading the Texans on a late game-winning drive to set up a 38-yard Matt Amendola field goal as time expired to win 30-27. Noah Brown had an insane 172 yards, and Stroud did just enough to beat fellow former Ohio State quarterback Joe Burrow and end a Bengals 4-game win streak. Now, when you look back at CJ Stroud's rookie season, one game sticks out as the worst. Stroud threw 5 picks all year. 3 came in week 11 against the Cardinals. Stroud made it clear that he wasn't going to stop letting it fly and said,
man, Steph Curry don't ever stop shooting. I'm keeping letting it ride.
Despite Stroud struggling and not even scoring in the second half, the Texans managed to win 21-16. Devin Singletary helped carry the load with 112 yards and a touchdown, and Tank Dell had a season-high 149 yards with a touchdown. Stroud rebounded the next week with 2 touchdowns and no interceptions, but the Texans lost 24-21 to the Jaguars after Amendola's 58-yard field goal attempt with 34 seconds left hit the crossbar. The Texans won 22-17 against the Broncos in week 13. It was a good win, and Nico Collins went off with 191 yards. Unfortunately, that came after Tank Dell suffered a broken leg, ending his season. That was a big blow for the Texans offense, especially right before the final stretch of the season, but the injuries were just starting. Week 14 was a disaster for Houston. They couldn't move the ball at all and lost 30-6 to the Jets, and late in the loss, CJ Stroud suffered a concussion. Suddenly, the Texans were 7-6 and without their star rookie quarterback. Luckily, somehow they survived the next week to beat the Titans 19-16 in overtime thanks to a 54-yard Keami Fairbairn field goal. Case Keenum had 229 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. He didn't play as well the next week and was benched in the third quarter for Davis Mills. The Texans got blasted 36-22, while Amari Cooper had a franchise record 265 receiving yards for the Browns. After missing 2 games, Stroud returned in week 17 to play the Titans. He passed for 213 yards and a touchdown in a big 26-3 win. Coming into week 18, the Texans, Colts, and Jaguars were all 9-7 and fighting for the AFC South crown. In the biggest game of his young career, CJ Stroud delivered with 264 yards and 2 touchdowns to help the Texans win 23-19 and secure a spot in the postseason. Once the Titans later beat the Jags, it secured Houston the division title. So there was going to be a playoff game at NRG Stadium, but the Texans had to face the team that crushed them 3 weeks before. This time though, the Texans had a healthy CJ Stroud. At 22 years and 102 days old, Stroud became the youngest quarterback in NFL history to win a postseason game, passing Michael Vick after a 45-15 destruction of the Joe Flacco-led Browns. Stroud passed for 274 yards and 3 touchdowns in his playoff debut as Houston moved on to the divisional round to play the top-seeded Ravens. I went to Baltimore for the game, and somehow Houston found a way to go into the half tied at 10 after a Steven Sims punt return touchdown. However, Houston didn't score in the second half and lost 34-10. It was a disappointing end to the season, but it was still a successful year for the Texans. The story of the Texans' 2023 season was without a doubt CJ Stroud. He didn't just have a good rookie year, he looked like one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Stroud had 4,108 yards, 23 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. His clear top target was Nico Collins. He was a third-round pick out of Michigan in 2021 and had just 927 yards and 3 touchdowns in his first 2 seasons. In year 1 with Stroud, Collins went for almost 1,300 yards and 8 touchdowns. Tank Dell put together a good rookie season, considering he only played in 11 games. He had 700 yards and 7 touchdowns. There were also 3 other players that had over 400 receiving yards. Dalton Schultz had 635, Noah Brown had 567, and Robert Woods had 426. On the ground, offseason signing Devin Singletary had a career-high 898 yards and 4 touchdowns, and 2022 fourth-rounder Damian Pierce had 416 yards. Defensively, 2020 third-rounder Jonathan Grenard had 12.5 sacks, Will Anderson had 7, Shelton Rankins had 6, and Malik Collins had 5 sacks in his 3rd year in Houston. Then, 2022 third overall pick Derek Stingley had 5 interceptions while playing in just 11 games because of a hamstring injury. Clearly, there is a lot of young talent in Houston, and that helped them speed rebuild in 1 year. Plus, D'Amico Ryans did a fantastic job, but most importantly, CJ Stroud looked like a franchise quarterback and should only get better. The future is very bright for the Texans.